How's it going? In this video, I'm going to share with you 3 insanely powerful concepts and principles. And then within each of these principles, there's lots of practical applications. So it's going to be a very simple, short video, 3 high-level, life-changing principles if you can get them, and I'll break down simple applications within them. So the first one is that time is not linear. Time is not linear, and it's not sequential. This is a old school Newton view of time that views time as, first off, outside of yourself. It views time as absolute, where time is the same for everyone. Newton's views of time have been replaced by, first off, Einstein's theories of relativity that show that time is actually flexible, it's changeable, it's individual, it's subjective. And so time is relative from person to person, and you can actually slow time down. You can stretch it, you can change it. Also, from a psychology standpoint, time is actually holistic. And I'm going to tell you why this matters, because it matters because you can actually obviously utilize the past, the present, and the future all at once. So when I say time is holistic, from a psychology standpoint, the past, the present, and the future all exist all at once. And that who you are right now is purely based on your views of the past and your views of the future. You're being pulled forward by your views of the future. You're also being driven by your views of the past. And so why this matters is that you can actually non-linearly change your views of the past. You can change the story. You can change the narrative. You can change how you feel about the past. That's what really post-traumatic growth is all about, is that you can reframe the meaning of your past over and over again. There's actually a quote from one of my favorite psychologists. His name is Brent Slife. He wrote a book called Time and Psychological Explanation. And in that book, he says that it's actually more accurate to say that the present causes the meaning of the past than to say that the past causes the meaning of the present. In other words, whatever you see in the present, wherever you're at, in your mind, in your views, that's going to shadow, or that's going to filter how you view the past. And we see this in culture. When culture changes and when politics and things like that change, we then have a different lens and we look at the past differently. Maybe we start to cancel people from the past because now we're looking at them from the present perspective. But the idea here is that primarily, as a person, your past is not what's dictating you. It's actually your present perspective that dictates your view of the past. And the more conscious you become, the more you actually take ownership of your past. You start to transform your past. You realize that your past is just as imagined and just as quote unquote fictional, using Dan Sullivan's language, as the future. You can make up the future, and you actually are making up the future. And also you're making up your view of the past. I know that this may throw you off because certainly events did happen. And I'm not saying you can change events, but I'm saying no two people see the same thing the same way, and you're not the same person as you were in the past. And so you don't have to see the past the same way you did when you experienced it, maybe even as a child, having gone through trauma, etc. Post-traumatic growth means that you actually look on your past experiences from a new perspective, and you get benefits, growth out of it. And ultimately, you're extremely grateful for it. You realize that you're actually better as a result. You're no longer bitter as a result of what happened. And so every experience that happens in your life happens for you, not to you. And you're the one who defines the meaning of your past. No other person has had access to your past. No other person has access to your experiences. Even me and you hanging out right now, watching this video, you're having a different experience than I am, and I can never get to your experience. And so you get to control the meaning of your experience, and you get to either devalue it by saying it was bad and that your past was wrong, or you can actually increase the value of your experiences, no matter how challenging they were, and you can use them to get better and better. And so the idea here, number one principle, is time is holistic. As people, we are driven by our views of the future, and we're also heavily impacted by our views of the past. And a powerful psychology means that you have a compelling, hopeful, exciting future that's stretching you, and also you have a positive past that's propelling you. Your past can always be something that's moving you forward. Dan Sullivan and I, who is the founder of Strategic Coach, we actually wrote an entire book on this called The Gap and the Gain. And by the way, down below in the description, if you're in the United States, you can actually download the free Kindle version of this. I have a ton of Kindle codes. So all you have to do is go to the page and you can put in your email, and we will send you a free Kindle code of this. Same is true of this book, Be Your Future Self Now, which is a book I recently published. Both of these books, if you're in the US, Kindles are completely free, completely available. If you're not in the US, I have a peak state checklist that almost 1 million people have downloaded, which you can get. So this takes us to principle number 2, which is a concept called fitness function. Fitness function is a really interesting idea that I've learned in the past probably a year. And fitness function is the idea that as people, we're all optimizing for something. Like fitness function is the idea that There are certain standards that you're trying to achieve or trying to optimize yourself for. And so it's the fitness is the development. It's the skills you develop. It's the path you're on. You're developing fitness, but it's what kind of fitness? And so this leads to the question of who's your future self? What's your fitness function? What are you ultimately trying to become? What are you optimizing for? And why this is such an important concept is because we are all moving in a direction. As a person, you're moving in a direction. You're becoming someone highly specific. I'm becoming someone highly specific. And whatever you focus on, you create more of. As people, we have a very subjective lens to the world. We have a filter that we see things through. I love the quote, you don't see the world as it is, you see the world as you are. You also see what you're looking for. And so when you start to define your future self, you start to define your future standards and you get very specific with them, very fine grained in terms of where you're trying to go, what you want, who you're trying to become. Then you start to shape your perceptual filter and you start to shape what you see. Dangerously, or just as importantly, is you also start to shape what you don't see. When you start to create your mental filter and you start to move yourself in a direction, you also determine what you no longer see, what you filter out. This is important. I love the concept of Tim Ferriss, which he called selective ignorance or strategic ignorance, which is actually strategically becoming unaware of a lot of things. You're actually filtering out a lot of the things because you realize most things are non-essential. That actually connects with Greg McKeown's book, Essentialism. And I think it's a quote from John C. Maxwell, where he said, you cannot overestimate the unimportance of practically everything. So the reality is that 99% of things out in the world are actually not only non-useful, but they're actually distractive. If your input shapes your outlook, whatever you let in, and right now you're letting in this, but like whatever you're letting into your consciousness is literally reshaping your consciousness. Your input shapes your outlook. Your input shapes your world. Your input shapes who you are. And so you want to ultimately get better and better at crafting a filtering process that ultimately filters out most of the things in the world, because most of it is not only distractive, it's actually destructive. It's going to reshape you and take you a different direction. It's going to lead to a different fitness function. So fitness function just asks the question, what are the standards you want to live by? What's the filter through which you want to operate? And who do you want to become? That's the fitness, is who do you want to become in specific manners, in a specific way. Another easy way of saying this is just who's your future self in very specific ways. Like, what does your future self do? How do they live? What are the standards by which they live by? What are the results they can produce regularly? What are the skills, the capabilities they have? Fitness function is a great perspective. It also just helps you clarify who your future self is, what your future self is, what they can do, how they live, how they operate, just like an airplane. An airplane in Los Angeles, if it's going to New York, it has a destination. And so you as a person want to have a destination. As people, we're driven by our views of the future in large part. And so you want to get very specific about that view so that you can take a straight course rather than just going in a direction you don't really know about. Research is pretty clear on this. Most people are not very clear on their future self. Most people overly assume that their future self isn't any different than their current self. And so most people don't have a clear fitness function. Most people are not optimizing themselves for anything. And so their filter is so wide and they're just letting all sorts of random inputs in that they're tossed to and fro. They're confused. They're not moving in a specific direction. They're not becoming a specific type of person. And so they're letting the outside world dictate who they become. The third concept is a very practical one, which I love, which comes from Dan Sullivan of Strategic Coaching. It's called your dream check or your largest check. One of the things that Dan teaches his entrepreneurs is to clarify a dream check that they would get one day for the value that they can create. This helps you clarify your future self. It also helps you clarify a Dan Sullivan concept, which he calls unique ability. Other people would call it zone of genius. But it's the idea of, what is a dream check of yours? Seriously, a check that someone would write you for the skills that you have, which would be your dream project. The actor Jim Carrey actually applied this principle back in the early 90s. So in 1990, Jim Carrey was a struggling comic, and he would drive up, this is a famous story, he's talked about it on Oprah, but he would drive up to the Hollywood Hills, look down, and again, he was a struggling actor, a struggling comic.
That you used to go up on Mulholland Drive and park
every night
and visualize seeing yourself as...
I would visualize things coming to me that I wanted or whatever.
This was in like 1987, 85?
Yeah. And I had nothing at that time, so it was like, but it just made me feel better.
He had big dreams for himself. He saw himself acting in big movies. He had a fitness function. He had a clear person he wanted to transform himself into. And part of that fitness function you could identify as a dream check. And so he was optimizing himself towards this dream check. And so he wrote a check to himself for $10 million. And in the notation line, he said, for acting services rendered.
I wrote myself a check for $10 million for acting services rendered. And I gave myself 5 years, or 3 years maybe, and I dated at Thanksgiving 1995.
So he wanted to be paid $10 million for a single project, for a single movie. And he gave himself 5 years to do it. In the line, he said Thanksgiving of 1995. And he wrote this in the year 1990. So he gave himself 5 years to optimize himself to become the kind of person who could receive that kind of payment. And that year he did, in 1995, got paid a $10 million check to be in the movie Dumb and Dumber.
Just before Thanksgiving 1995, I found out that I was going to make $10 million on, I think it was Dumb and Dumber, maybe.
Dumb and Dumber, yeah.
Yeah.
So you visualize yourself like... Visualization works if you work hard.
Yeah.
And Dan Sullivan has been teaching this idea for quite a while, like a long time, and it's a great concept. I love it. And so one thing you could do to clarify your fitness function and your future self is just to write out a dream check for something specific that you could do. But in thinking about that dream check, you have to ask yourself the question, and that dream check should be 10x whatever you've been paid for a project that excites you. It should be insane and completely impossible to who you are right now. It's amazing because research shows that impossible goals that are so big, are actually easier than small goals, because impossible goals have only a few paths. If you're going for just a small form of progress, there's too much decision fatigue. But an insane goal, a big goal, a 10x goal is useful because there's only one or two ways you can get there. So it forces you to clear out the clutter. So I invite you to apply these concepts. Start living time more holistically, where you can transform your past, transform your future. You're not caught just, you're not caught in a linear version of time. The second one is define your fitness function. The third is clarify your dream check, which is just so big, so massive, but then give yourself a date. And then you use fitness function as an idea to transform yourself into the kind of person who could get that dream check in the next 3 to 5 years that is just unfathomable to the current version of you, but your future self, it's going to be completely natural. You getting that kind of check is just completely natural. I'm Dr. Benjamin Hardy. If you like this video, please subscribe to this channel for more research on future self, exponential entrepreneurship. And again, grab these books down below for free, the Kindles if you're in the US. If not, go ahead and grab my Peak State Checklist. Subscribe to the channel. Have an amazing day.